Hello, I'm Mark Davies. Welcome to the panel on alternative investments to EB5 and accessing the US market. We have a great team of panelists here who broadly fit into the categories of legal, people who can talk to you about alternative investments that are available in America, and then we have an expert on the Citizenship by Investment program. So without further ado, let me introduce our other panelists, beginning with Mr. Ron Klasko.
Hi, I'm Ron Klasko. I'm the managing partner of Klasko Immigration Law Partners. We're one of the world's largest immigration firms based in Philadelphia and New York. I'm a 5-term chairman of the EB5 committee of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and a past president of that organization.
Thanks, Ron. Mohammed in Dubai.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mohammed Assaryam. I'm founder and managing director of Range Developments. Our journey into immigration started in 2012 with our foray into the Caribbean, and since then we've become the largest developer in the Caribbean. We've opened the Park Hyatt Hotel in St. Kitts, the Kempinski in Dominica, and we're working on the Six Princes Hotel in Grenada, and look forward to sharing some thoughts on Caribbean citizenship by investment this afternoon.
Great. Okay, Gonzalo.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gonzalo Lopez Jordan. I'm managing partner and CEO of Patagonia Financial Holdings, a private equity firm based in Miami, Florida, which has one of the affiliated companies, American Regional Center Group, which is a specialist in immigration by investment. We deal mainly with immigration to the US, but we're also an official marketing agent for the government of Grenada for the CBI passport program. And we're here to discuss alternative ways or ways to fasten your coming to the US.
Great. Dan?
Thanks, Mark. Dan Wycklendt with FirstPathway Partners in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. FirstPathway has been working in the investment immigration space since 2008, and we're very excited to be here today to present new opportunities to people that may not have heard of some of them before.
Great, super, thanks. So I'm Mark Davies, as I said. I'm the founder of Davies and Associates. So we have different locations around the world at this point. I have a separate E2 team and L1 team, and then we have done quite a number of EB5s at this point too. So if we're talking about alternatives to EB5, I think it might be helpful to do to start with is to understand sort of broadly what the landscape is. So Ron, if I'm not doing a regional center EB5, then what are the other options that are available to me generally, and sort of what type of investor might that work for?
Thanks, Mark. So generally what we're looking at in terms of options are the E2 visa and the L1 visa. Now the E2 visa in many countries in Africa, this is relatively new, but actually it's not new at all. Over 80 countries in the world have investment treaties with the US that allow for the E2. Most African countries do not. So what we're going to be talking about today, which is getting citizenship in a treaty country by investment and then doing an E2, is probably somewhat new to this audience, but we have done over thousands of E2 visas for over 80 countries in the world for a long time.
So just a really quick question on that when you're going through. So President Trump, right? He has these bans. Does that apply to an E2?
No, it does not. And that's a good point, Mark. When you're talking about immigration options to the US in 2020, you have to be very aware of the politics in the US. And part of that is that President Trump has banned L1 visas through at least December 31, 2020. What happens after that depends on whether he's reelected or not. E2 visas are not banned. So as of today, the L1 is really not an option. It's only an option if you're looking at going into 2021. So I think it's a good idea to at least do a quick overview of what some of the differences are. So with the E2, you're qualifying based on an investment. what's called a substantial investment. No exact amount, and we may talk about that as we go. With the L1, you're qualifying based upon being the day-to-day manager of a business in the US. You do not have to be the day-to-day manager with the E2. So if you're a high net worth individual looking to invest in the US, immigrate to the US, but not necessarily be the day-to-day manager, then the E2 is a better option. The L1 is generally looking at bigger companies. Companies that have multiple levels of employees that the manager is going to manage. The E2 is not focused so much on employees, focused on the investment, the financial prospects for the business going forward. And the E2 has a huge advantage in today's world of being something you can apply for directly at a US consulate, either in your country or in another country. And you don't have to go through the immigration service. And anything where, again, in 2020, you can avoid going through the US Immigration Service is a benefit. Another advantage of the E2 is the E2 is generally issued for 5 years and can be extended 5 years at a time indefinitely. Whereas the L1 for a startup company is issued for 1 year and can be extended, if the company grows, up to a maximum of 7 years. The other thing I'll mention is that both options are available for people who want to apply for a green card ultimately. Usually, there's 2 options to apply for a green card. One is EB5, which a lot of the audience may know about, which is a green card by investment. And the other, which may be a little bit less known, is something called EB1C, which is a multinational manager. And the main thing for now is just that everyone understand that the EB1C multinational manager option is available whether you do the E2 or the L1. In either case, you have to show that you were a manager of the company outside of the US for at least 1 year, and that you are now the manager of a company that's related at least 50% equity relationship, and you're a manager of the company in the US going forward.
So we have clients who just want to really some of them just want to start a small business in America, right? And perhaps they don't even have a company already. They don't have a business. So how would that play out for a client like that?
Yes, that's a good point, Mark. With that, then the L1 is not an option at all. The E2 is the only option, because for the L1, you have to show that you have been managing a sizable company outside of the US with levels of employees for at least a year, and now you're being transferred to an affiliate or subsidiary in the US.
Gotcha.
With the E2, your overseas employment is irrelevant. Everything is focused on your US investment.
Unless perhaps the client wants to plan to do an EB1C or something in the long term and a conversion, and then that's a different planning point, right?
Yeah, so whenever we're dealing with E2s, L1s, people coming to the US, one thing we want to know is, are the eventual plans to get a green card? For a lot of our clients, for tax reasons or otherwise, they may not be ever interested in getting a green card. But if a green card is a possibility for them, then when we're preparing the E2 or the L1, we're going to be preparing it in a way that's going to smooth out the ultimate goal of applying for a green card.
Got it. So one of the things you mentioned, Ron, is that to get an E2, you have to be from a treaty country. Now, there are, I think, 3 countries right now where you can get a passport relatively immediately, being Grenada, Turkey, and Montenegro, perhaps the newest entrant. So Mohammed, with your expertise on CBI, if I'm from a non-E2 treaty country and I want to avail myself of the E2, how might you be able to help and with those types of processes?
Sure, thanks, Mark. So we're developers in the Caribbean, and the resorts that we develop, investors who invest close to $250,000 plus some government fees are able to obtain second citizenship from the relevant country. So as Mark touched upon, you have the island of Grenada in the Caribbean, which benefits from an E2 treaty visa with the United States. So what we're seeing at the moment, especially in light of some of the immigration changes that Mr. Klasko and Mr. Davies mentioned, especially also with regards to the ban on Nigerians applying for permanent residency, which is the EB5, a number of individuals are acquiring Grenadian citizenship, investing in our development in Grenada. Not only does it provide you with a stepping stone to enter into the United States, but it also provides you with a bespoke solution. You obtain a second citizenship, which can help with global mobility. You can travel to 140 countries around the world, whether that's the United Kingdom, Schengen, Russia, China, most of Latin America, most of Asia. So it's a fantastic standalone investment. And the icing on the cake is it provides you with the ability to access the world's largest economy, the United States, through the E2 visa. Now, why we're seeing a significant amount of investors choose Grenada rather than the other two countries that Mark mentioned, those being Turkey and Montenegro, is that each E2 visa treaty is a bilaterally negotiated document between the United States and the recipient country. Grenada has the most flexible in terms of its length. It's 5 years, multiple renewable, whereas Montenegro, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, gentlemen, is limited to 12 months, and there's limits on the number of times it may be renewed. So it's altogether a better deal, and Grenada is half the price in terms of the citizenship acquisition cost than Montenegro. It has wider visa-free travel than Montenegro and Turkey combined, and it's a country which benefits from political stability. Grenada doesn't wish to engage on the international scene with any country or counterparty. It wishes to remain below the radar, for a better description, and provide investors with a peace, tranquil, political, stable environment in which they can get second citizenship within a 3 to 6 month period, cost effectively, and then springboard into the United States on one of the two avenues that Ron and Mark have discussed.
So in terms of the Grenada program, I think most people looking into this, Mohammed, realistically, are going to find out quickly that there are multiple options to obtain a Grenadian citizenship, right? Beyond sort of investment in the hotel project. How would you characterize the advantages and disadvantages? I think, for my firm, the first case we touched Grenada was in 2014, right after the current iteration of the Grenada program came about. I think your option is sort of relatively new. I think it's a very attractive option, and it seems to have changed the pattern, which was sort of donation. Perhaps you can explain the difference to people between those things and the advantages and disadvantages.
No, that's a fantastic question, Mark. So there's two routes to obtain citizenship of Grenada. The first is through making a contribution to the government under Section 10 of the relevant law. The second is through making an investment in real estate under Section 11. As you mentioned, historically, the price was $350,000 as the minimum investment under the real estate limb. To encourage our entry into Grenada, we worked with the government to restructure the program at the end of 2018 and early 2019. And one of the changes that we recommended, which was adopted, was a realignment of price to $220,000 as the minimum investment threshold under the real estate route to make Grenada competitive with the other islands in the Caribbean. The donation price point is very little below that. So when you look at the difference between if you are a family making a non-refundable donation to the government to obtain your citizenship, or investing and obtaining a well-performing asset, the difference is approximately $50,000 to $60,000. Wow. The big advantage of making an investment is, one, you have an asset, you've invested in the largest hotel on the island, you make a yield along the way depending on the performance of the asset, and most importantly, after 5 years, I can sell my asset to another individual who also wishes to qualify for citizenship and obtain citizenship in Grenada, whilst I retain my original citizenship in perpetuity. So I've returned my capital, I've made an income, and I've also had the links to Grenada of being an investor in the largest project in the island. And that's why a lot of people are looking at real estate today with a different gloss since the amendments were made in 2019. And I believe that's consistent with what you're seeing in your firm, Mark, correct?
Correct. Let me ask you a follow-up question, Mohammed, and then I'm going to give him fair warning, come back to Ron for a legal perspective on this. So one of the difference we see, we have 10 lawyers now in Istanbul. We've done, I think it's over 450 Turkey CBI cases. But one of the huge advantages we see of Grenada is, and perhaps you can talk to this, is the generosity of what a dependent is under the Grenadian program. So we've certainly had at least one family from India who has gone through Grenada E2 and can get a whole group together because of the generosity of the Grenadian program in recognizing dependents, and then the fact that you can own only 50% of the E2, which I'm going to ask Ron to speak to in a second, but perhaps you can talk to that.
Sure. So Mark, if you look at the definition of dependence in Grenada, to take your word, it's very generous. You can go up and down the chain, so you can include your parents, your grandparents, your kids, your grandkids, your siblings. And I believe Grenada is really one of the only citizenship by investment programs where you can include your siblings. Yes, there's additional charges. You have to be over 18 and not have children. So this was another amendment which coincided with our entry into Grenada when these legislative changes were made. And because of that, and because most investors coming and acquiring second citizenship from emerging markets, and the government of Grenada recognizes that family is important. This was one of the competitive advantages that Grenada has over its peers who are involved in the citizenship by investment sector.
Right, it can be very economic. So Ron, if you've got a sort of a larger family group, and I think in sort of the African countries too, often, an entire family wants to come through. Can you talk about sort of how that might fit together and how it might be more efficient than other options?
Yeah, so when you're doing the E2, your one investment in the US, which can be as little as $100,000 to $200,000. There's no exact amount. It really depends on just how much is necessary for the business you're investing in to be successful. That one investment will result in you and your spouse and any under 21-year-old children all getting E2 status. And one of the big benefits of the E2 is that when your spouse gets E2 status, he or she can work anywhere she wants in the US without employer sponsorship. And another huge benefit is that the E2 children can go to public school, private school, university, all on the E2.
So 2 follow-up questions. One, just a very fast, small point, is we certainly have Indian clients where the husband's very happy to get a Grenada passport, but the wife doesn't want one. So in order for the wife, as a derivative, to get an E2, does she need to get a Grenadian citizenship?
No, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought it up, Mark. And the answer is no. So as long as the principal investor has Grenadian citizenship, if the other family members don't want to get Grenadian citizenship, they don't have to, and they can still get E2 visas.
Great. Now, suppose I just bought my unmarried brother through the Grenada program. I invested in Mohammed's hotel. So now I have a Grenada passport for myself. I have a Grenada passport for my unmarried brother and one for my parents. So I have actually one of our potential clients from Vietnam. I have 3 nail spas in Atlanta. Already. Now we can talk about how does it work in terms of investment that may have perhaps to have been made after becoming a Grenada citizen. How does that work? And can I bring my other family members leveraging something like that through the program?
All right. So first of all, unless you're a spouse or an unmarried child, you're not getting benefits through the one investment. So each of the family members you mentioned, the brother, the parents, whatever, would have to do their own E2 investment to qualify for E2. The only exception to that is that, and we've done this, for example, where you have, let's say, 2 brothers who are getting Grenada citizenship and both want to come to the US. We can have one brother be the E2 investor and the other brother can qualify under what's called an E2 manager visa. So there are three types of E2 visas. There's an E2 for the investor, there's an E2 for a manager who doesn't have to make any investment, and there's an E2 for what's called an essential skill employee. So in the two brother examples, we can have one brother be the main investor, and he gets the E2 visa as the investor. He can oversee the business, doesn't have to manage it. He can hire the other brother, who's also a Grenada citizen, to get an E2 manager visa.
Suppose, I mean, we've certainly had a few of these approved now. There's a track history. So suppose that I have my brother and we own it 50-50, or in my nail spa example, let's suppose that it's sort of one company, but we now split it up to three. So the family business, grandma and granddad own nail spa 1, brother owns nail spa 2, and principal investor owns nail spa 3. Or let's suppose we leave it as a 3 and there's a holding company. I own 50% and my brother owns 50%. How might that work?
Yeah, so I'm perfectly fine with the example you gave where there's 3 different nail spas, and each of the 3 people invest in one of the nail spas. And as long as we can show that the amount of the investment by each person is substantial, they can each get the E2 investor visa. What I don't like so much is the concept of 2 investors, each 50-50, and each trying to get an E2 visa. That can work with a very, very large company, but with a smaller company, it can get very difficult if neither investor has invested a very high percentage of the total amount required. So one of the concepts of a substantial investment, as I've said a few times, there's no exact amount. Substantial means a high percentage of the amount that's necessary for that type of business to be successful. And we show that case by case. So if I have 2 50-50 investors, each of whom have invested 200,000, it could be that neither will qualify because neither one has invested a high percentage of the total. So usually in that scenario, we like to have one as the manager and the other as the investor, and have the one be the main investor.
Right. And you can also, I think, split companies out, right? So if you have an operating business, you can actually sometimes, depending on the circumstances in the business, perhaps divide it into 2 companies, right? 2 different.
Yes, then I'm okay. If it's 2 separate companies and each investor is the principal investor in one company. Investor A is the principal in the first company, and he's made all or most of the investment in the first, and another one has made all or most of the investment in the second, then I'm okay. The concept of a holding company, yes, we can do that. Honestly, when we try to dumb it down as much as possible, U.S. consuls are not financial experts, corporate structuring experts, even legal experts. And what we try to do as best as we can is present something that's very, very clear. If, you know, that's kind of our guiding principle.
I have 2 follow-up questions. One is, and I'll ask them both and then let you respond. One is, I certainly notice a difference between different consulates. It might depend on how many E2 visas they've seen, right? Because some of these consulates might not have seen very many. And different consular offices seem to have, not vastly, diametrically different, perhaps, but some nuanced differences that's worthwhile being aware of. So perhaps you can talk to that. Then also the other thing when we're talking about these risks to bear in mind, and I'm sure it's the same for your firm, we've never ever had an E2 visa refused, ever. Because there's a lot of people who come and say, well, I'm worried about the chances of success. And perhaps you can talk to the overall approval rates of E2s, which I think are quite strong. And I suspect your firm probably has the same record as mine when it comes to the actual application. So perhaps you can talk to those 2 things.
All right, so there's a lot there. Let's get to it. So first of all, and you're very right, Mark, the choice of the U.S. consulate that you're applying at is critical. This is not like EB5. It's not like L1. where everything's pre-approved by the Immigration Service. This is the U.S. consul will look at things, will be the first group looking at it. So we almost always have multiple choices. So if we have a Grenada citizen, one choice is applying at the U.S. consulate in Barbados, which covers Grenada. Another choice is applying at the U.S. consulate in the country of citizenship of our client. A third choice is applying at the U.S. consulate in another country where our client has a business or a residence. And a fourth choice is applying at any U.S. consulate in the world that we can convince to take this case. And some of them are perfectly happy taking it because they're not very busy. So a big part of our job, and this changes constantly because the people at the consulates change. This is not a location issue. It's a who are the people issue. And so we constantly look at the different choices we have and customize for each of our clients what's going to be best for that client, which consul should we apply at. And then it's a very critical part of our job to prepare the client in detail for what's likely to be asked at the interview. And we as you, Mark, do a high volume of these. So based on that and based on talking to our clients, we know and keep an ongoing list of every question that any consul ever asks our clients so we can prepare our clients going forward. I agree with you, the chances of success of the E2 are extremely high. As I've mentioned before, we've done thousands of these successfully. And it's incredibly rare. I mean, sometimes we're going to screen something out and we're going to see a problem and say, no, this has to be changed before we file. But if we think something passes muster and we file, then the chances are exceedingly high that it is likely to be approved. And I would say much higher, Mark, just to finish the thought, the U.S. Immigration Service today, under the Trump administration, has become really tough on L1s, especially small company and startup L1s. Even putting aside the ban that exists through December 31, 2020. And that restrictive attitude has really not reached consuls adjudicating E2s based on bilaterally negotiated treaties where they're dealing with investors coming to the US to start businesses and create jobs. So far, the E2s have escaped the really unprecedentedly tough attitude that the U.S. Immigration Service has to many things, including the L1.
Okay, so just one sort of extra point I suddenly thought of is, to my knowledge, there are not many law firms, and I know yours is certainly one of them, that have people with approved E2 visas living in the United States who have gone this CBI route. I think that there's a limited universe of people who have, let's say, meaningful and consistent experience. So whilst I do think the E2 approval rates are very high, I think that, and your firm is certainly one of them, I would counsel clients doing this to go to a firm such as yours or mine that actually have meaningful experience with this CBI E2 route. What do you think about that?
Hard for me to disagree with that, Mark. No, I do think that's good advice.
Yeah. So, okay.
Mark,
yes,
sorry.
I was going to say, so if I don't have an E2 project lined up, right? Gonzalo.
Can I interrupt for a second? Sorry.
Yeah.
I would like to pose a question regarding the same topic to you and to Ron, because I think it is important for the public to know also. A lot of these processes are done together with a green card application, with an EB5 application. And there's a question of the intent. If you can comment on where do you see, both of you, the better option, if to file the E2 first, or if you already filed the EB5, what are the backlashes that you might encounter
I'll comment on that in general, but we've had clients do this, and so far people haven't had a problem. I'll give more specifics, but I'll let Ron speak first. I think there's a lot of misinformation in the market on this question. I hear sort of a lot of people, sounds as though the lawyers bluntly never done any of these cases. So Ron, I'll let you talk to that.
Yeah, so if we have a choice, we would prefer to file the E2 before we file the EB5, okay? However, we have many, many, many cases where EB5 was already filed. When I first started popularizing the concept of CBI and E2, it related to thousands of investors we had in China with EB5 and a 15-year waiting list to get into the country. And we had to come up with a solution to be able to get them here during that waiting period, and in some cases instead of EB5. So with that population, which is where we really started doing a lot of CBI E2s, we already had EB5 petitions pending. And in 100% of those cases, we were able to get E2. You do have to include a declaration from the investor in which he says that I do not intend to apply for a green card in the US. If I apply for a green card, it will eventually be at a US consulate outside of the US. And as long as you have that declaration, and unless there's some really negative factors going on, that should be sufficient for somebody to get an E2. So if everything's done right, and I agree with Mark that this is a special, immigration to the US is a specialty field. What we're talking about with CBI2 is a specialty field. But if you're dealing with somebody who has experience in this and knows the nuances, if you do things right, the chances are very good that you'll be able to get the E2 visa despite the fact that you already have an EB5 petition pending.
So now let's suppose, right, that we've got a client, wants to go through this, doesn't have any idea what business to do in the United States. So Dan, you haven't spoken yet. FPP, been in the investment immigration business for a long time, probably one of the leaders in the industry. What advice would you have for somebody who really doesn't have any idea what business to do in America?
Yeah, well, it's funny you bring that up because I think I've taken a lot of my advice from people on this panel. But we've inquired with a lot of attorneys because our clients in EB5, as you brought up, they were tired of waiting in line. Other clients that were interested in the past, especially clients from countries like Nigeria, are looking at the changes to programs like EB5, and they're saying there's got to be a better option. And this has been it. This has been something that has been huge for people. And when you talk about experience, it was bringing together people's different experiences with the program, its understanding, and designing a product that was repeatable and investable for people who did want to do E2, and then maybe even eventually EB5. So for instance, we have a product, a franchise product called Teriyaki Madness that we're actively bringing E2 investors into, and even E2 investors that aren't from treaty countries. I've had the pleasure of heading down to Grenada to visit Mohammed down there, it's a long trip, but it's a beautiful place to go. It's a beautiful place to spend time. And we've looked at these things because, as you said, that experience is important. I think a lot of attorneys shy away from E2 in general after going through CBI because they don't understand it. So, as you and Ron brought up, having that experience and understanding of CBI to E2 is good, but our experience in structuring an investment that people know is a solid investment, but also will accomplish their immigration goals, that's what we've kind of done at FirstPathway. And we did that in EB5. Now we do that in E2, and it's been really successful for us.
Cool. So Gonzalo, what are your thoughts on this? You're sort of, I think, more on the business side of this. Do you have advice to add?
Well, I mean, we have a similar approach or a similar evolution. Although our company is a private equity company and we do a lot of investments, we jump into the immigration by investment because of the request of some of the families that invest with us in some of the projects that we have developed in the past. And then, that opened our arm of EB5 almost 15 years ago. We've done a lot of EB5 projects, and some of them, Ron knows some of them. And we also, maybe because our background is from private banking, we identified early on, I would say right by the time that Ron started talking about this, and he was, I think, the first, important law voice in the industry to start recognizing that you need to apply certain strategies depending on the the aim and the final immigration needs of a family, and not just, you know, become a seller of a product. So that's why we went to Grenada. We became marketing agents for the government of Grenada. We work in the CBI program in both of the options that the CBI offers. We work on with, you know, the most important developers, among them obviously Mohammed's project in the island, but we also work with the National Transformation Fund, which is the donation option to the government, and that also led to us to look for E2 projects and E2 alternatives. Now, our approach has been always in the E2, and because our type of investors are more the passive type of investors, the high net worth individuals that they want solutions rather than distract their focus of attention from their operations or the investments into, you know, the investments that are needed for the immigration strategies. So we started early on with a transportation, logistic and transportation offer in the market. That filled up very quickly. Then we moved to a film production company in the US, where we structure these type of investments together with investors, and we manage that for them. So these are a group of producers that have done over 50 movies and productions in the US and abroad. They have won Oscars with Leonardo DiCaprio. They have won Toronto Film Festivals, Venice Film Festival, Cannes Film Festivals. And we have, we've been able to structure this type of investment also at a lower entry. So we're talking about a $220,000 investment into these structures. And we're also working with a coffee shop brand, very well known worldwide, Juan Valdez, which is you know, present in 32 countries around the world, has over 8,000 you know, points of sales around the world. And we're working with them on their expansion in the United States. And that's also an investment that has an entry point of $250,000. So that's what we're trying to do to accommodate the different type of the needs of our clients.
I think you know, an interesting thing to think about is, and I'll ask this question to Ron, is what if I'm thinking of a business in America from a E2 perspective? If I want my E2, what kind of businesses qualify? You know, do I have to be in specific industries, or, you know, what sort of are the requirements? When I'm looking at sort of things Gonzalo's talking about, Dan's talking about, there's franchises, there's non-franchises, people, you know, it can be a little bit confusing, Ron. So what do I need to sort of bear in mind if I want to make certain of my E2 visa? What kind of businesses?
Yeah. One of the great things about E2 is the flexibility. There's a lot more flexibility on E2 than there is on L1 or anything else. The only key is that whatever you invest in, you as the Grenadian citizen should own at least 50% or more of the business. So we do lots of franchises. The franchise model works well, and our investor owns anywhere between 50 and 100% of a particular franchise or 2 or 3 franchises. Perfectly fine. It is perfectly fine for an investor to acquire 50% or more of an existing business. That has the advantage that it's already an operating business. And that's perfectly fine. And unfortunately, in today's COVID world, there are lots of businesses available in the US for purchase. It's perfectly fine for an investor overseas to set up a subsidiary of his overseas company in the US. That's okay. It's perfectly fine to do a complete startup. It's perfectly fine to be in the real estate business, as long as it's an active real estate business and not just buying real estate and hoping it goes up in value. So the answer is that any type of business is fine, as long as it's an active business and as long as our investor owns at least 50%.
So let me ask you about franchises. You know, I know that your team carefully vets any franchises that your clients invest in, but are there potential loopholes that or traps that you're protecting your clients from with franchises when you do that?
Well, yeah, before we do work with various franchise brokers, and before with a number of them, they send us their franchises for us to do due diligence and vetting of whether it's good for E2. Not every franchise is going to work well for E2. And each law firm deals with it differently, but before we will go ahead with an E2, we will make sure we vet the franchise, not as to whether it's a good business opportunity, that's beyond our expertise, but whether we think it has a very good chance of getting the E2 visa approved if you become a franchisee.
So Dan, your firm has a Teriyaki franchise business. What's your perspective sort of on franchises and the opportunities that those present for E2 investors?
Well, with that question, let me also touch on something Ron brought up, which I think is important. For good or bad, the COVID world has brought new opportunities. When you're looking at whether it's purchasing a franchise, which with our Teriyaki badness, we obviously have those options, but it's also finding new opportunities with space that is not going to be used anymore. There are a lot of businesses that are not going to survive the COVID world. And for an E2 investor, what we found already is there's great opportunity to maybe still make a substantial investment to qualify for E2, but not as much as you would have had to 6 months ago, because those opportunities do exist. So, for us, and look at those business realities that Gonzalo talked about, it's about analyzing these opportunities, making sure first with someone like Mark or Ron that these actually will be something that will qualify well for E2 from an immigration standpoint. But what we do is we focus on that business aspect to make sure not only are you investing and you're going to be able to get access to the US, but take advantage of those opportunities that exist right now. Make a good investment, because that is the opportunity here. And I think by partnering with the right partners on that, you make a little less mistakes along the way.
So, Mohammed, I'm going to ask you, because I know that at Range Investments, you've had a lot of investors go through this program or are in the process of going through this program. Just overall, in terms of CBI to E2, what are your sort of comments and advice for success based on what you've seen?
So look, Mark, we've had investors go from various West African countries to be living in the United States today under the Grenada E2 route. So I think you and Ron did a fantastic deep dive into the legal matters, but I think you also need to look at the practicalities. So if you have an investor who's in Lagos today, the EB5 route is shut. The L1 route is shut. The H1B route is shut, okay? So really, the only route, if someone is going to progress down a US strategy, is to look at Grenada and then do the leapfrog into the United States that way. Now, I think what an investor has to remember is it's not just a residency. He's also getting citizenship in Grenada, which comes with a myriad of benefits. Travel, an option B, having a comfort blanket. God forbid, because we're in emerging markets, and I think everyone in the audience understands the risks which present themselves living in the emerging markets. However, one thing about the emerging markets, Nigeria, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, is that your earning power or the return on your invested capital in your business is going to be significant. So the main individual in the business may decide to remain in Lagos or Freeport, and the family will then migrate across. Now, in that situation, if that individual was to go down historically an EB5 route, that could cause problems because he'd be taxed on his worldwide income. Under the Grenada E2 route, he's not taxed on his income being generated in Nigeria if he doesn't spend a significant amount of time in the United States, which I believe is 122 days. So, there's a whole bunch of other advantages on the Grenada E2 route, which actually may make it more suitable, even if the fantasy of EB5 was still available to the West African investor. And that's something which really needs to be considered. So you're obtaining a second citizenship, which has a whole host of other benefits. You're obtaining a well-performing asset in an investment in a hotel in Grenada. where you have an exit route after 5 years. And then Dan and Gonzalo will be able to assist you migrate from West Africa into the United States, identify a business. And you've got to remember, sitting in Lagos, it's very difficult to make that transition into Milwaukee or Miami. You need someone there to help you. And that's why I think that some of the loose solutions offered by my co-panelists today really provide a fantastic opportunity and provide a very efficient mechanism to migrate into the United States.
Yeah, I'll ask the others for a wrap-up comment, but one of the things you just said, I think, is we've had a couple of clients now. I think one of them's with you, who, no, that's not true, but we've had a couple of clients now do Grenada who have absolutely no intention of doing E2 whatsoever at all. As you know, Mohammed, we have a tax department in New York, and they have advised some of the clients to look seriously at Grenada because it makes tax sense. I won't comment on that because I'm not a tax lawyer and I don't understand the intricacies, but I think it certainly is a strategy for some people that there may be advantages beyond the scope of sort of E2 and immigration.
Yeah, no, spot on. It also depends on the home state where you're coming from. So for example, where our audience comprises of individuals from West Africa, there is a very large Indian community in West Africa. If India comes out with a citizenship-based tax, and that will tax NRIs living in Lagos on the income that they generate in Lagos. There was murmurings of this in last year's budget. So in that situation, especially if you become a generation or 2 generations removed from India, it's a strategy you need to look at how you mitigate some of that tax charging.
That's true.
And one of the ways to do it is to surrender your Indian passport, take a Grenadian passport, and take an overseas citizenship of India card.
Right. I'm going to ask the others for comments, but just again to agree with you, as you know, we have 3 of the 10 wealthiest families in India as clients. Many of them have exposures in Dubai, where you are. And what you just said is 100% true. When the Indian budget came out, a lot of people, Indians, residents of NRIs, felt, oh, the sky is falling, and people were running around in panic mode. It sort of died down a bit, but I agree with you, completely, 100%. So, Ron, do you have any wrap-up comments?
I guess I would wrap it up by saying when I first started discussing this way of coming to the U.S. for high net worth individuals through CBI, through Grenada, a lot of people said, boy, that sounds very interesting, but I don't want to do this until I know others have done it successfully. And honestly, for the first couple of years, we were stuck on that, everyone waiting for someone else. Now, lots of people have done this successfully. There are lots of good examples of people who now have businesses in the U.S. And who've done it through Grenada and through the E2. So I have no hesitation whatsoever in advising my clients that for many of them, getting citizenship through Grenada and through the real estate option that Mohammed has discussed very eloquently, and then using that to invest in the U.S. and getting an E2 visa is really the best option for a lot of our clients.
I agree. I absolutely agree. I think an E2 is a much more flexible, easier visa than the L1. Thanks for that. Dan, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, I do. I think, everybody said it really well, but in general, this is a huge decision, right? I mean, people are looking to migrate, but also it's an investment decision as well. So, I mean, as Mohammed said, you kind of want to take the guesswork out of it, right? You want to go with groups that understand this, and Mohammed has had this figured out. We've looked at his group for a long time. And I think as he says that's important, because when you are making an investment somewhere, you want to make sure your investment's safe, but it's also going to accomplish your goals. So I think that in general, you got to do your research, find people who understand this product, as a lot of people on this panel do and have done it before, because that's really important.
Gonzalo.
Yes, sir.
Your turn.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that this panel has covered a lot of material. You have people like Dan and his company, or on our company, that I think that we we really specialize in understanding first what you need to accomplish in order not just to put together the correct legal strategy, immigration legal strategy, but also the investment strategy. And to mention something, to follow up on what Mohammed was saying, which I think was super important, is that this type of process, the CBI with the E2, also gives you time to plan, time to adjust your corporate structure, your tax structure, your tax liabilities. And that's it's very important when you're making decisions that will, impact your family and your finances for a long, long time. So that's another point that I want to underline, because I think it's very important that this route, this alternative route gives you, and once you are a resident, you don't have it anymore, right? I mean, this is the time where you can do all that preparation work and all that planning.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you to everybody on the panel.